Good morning, everyone, and a Happy New Year. Here it is, the first day of the new year. Now, today we're going to start with question time, answering questions that people have put forward for me to answer. Okay, and the first one is, Phil, what does the science say about vitamin D3? What is the connection with the sun, and is it that important? Good question. Now, you might find this quite interesting, as I certainly did. First up, the following scientific information is freely available to everyone. It's no secret. So, in us humans, vitamin D3 is created by a unique chemical reaction between the sun's UV rays, sometimes very dangerous, and the same demonized cholesterol that, in this case, lives just under the surface of our skin. Now, that chemical reaction is transported in our blood first to the kidneys, where it's converted to what we call vitamin D3, and then again transported in our blood to every cell in our body, including our brain and those areas of the skin where the sun's rays land. Now, those skin cells are biochemically supported by the same D3 so that they can receive even more sun exposure without damage. Yeah, without damage, and produce even more vitamin D3. The more the better, and around it goes. Without it, we simply can't exist. So, just for interest, why is it promoted that the sun's rays are so dangerous and cancer-forming? Well, contrary to popular marketing, but science says malignant melanomas are not caused by sunshine, as the advertising tells us, because they can appear anywhere on the body, including those places where the sun don't shine. Yeah. Now, while a lack of sunshine, which means a lack of vitamin D3, has been clearly proven to promote cancer of all kinds. Now, how do the Eskimo people exist without the sun in the northern cold areas? That's a good question. Well, with few special exceptions, most living creatures, and certainly every mammal on the planet, requires fresh air, fresh water, and the special energy from the sun's rays to exist. Now, over millions of years, as our human ancestors migrated from the southern hemisphere into the colder, less sunlit areas on the planet, being the northern hemisphere, Greenland, Arctic Circle, Iceland, Russia, Siberia, etc., the cold areas, fortunately, they discovered that they could survive on the wildlife that they caught and ate. Now, by pure fluke, it turned out that the wildlife had evolved by eating tiny plankton that live in the sea, which had evolved to be able to make their own vitamin D3. Now, as these plankton were eaten further up the food chain, the vitamin D3 was passed on to the next species and eventually to us humans. Seal meat, whale meat, cod, and salmon, etc. Now, unbeknown to our early ancestors, and fortunately, it meant that they could exist without the need to have to sunbathe regularly. Other migrating grazing animals which they hunted during those warmer seasons were able to produce their own D3, which they licked from their fur, swallowed in their saliva to be used inside the body. They also became food for the humans. And that is why us humans can get enough vitamin D3 anywhere in the world from the influence of the sun's rays on our skin, from the specific foods we can eat, and nowadays that includes supplements. Yeah. So excluding the supplements, nothing has changed in the past million years. And that's handy to know. Now, except in today's world, we cover our body, stay out of the sun, spend most of our time inside a building, and often avoid vitamin D3 rich foods because we can. And it is what the health system and pharmaceutical system promote as the safest way forward. Now, unfortunately, this modern lifestyle all contributes to a well-documented, increasingly overwhelmed and underfunded health system, as the incidence of poor health, including mental health, in most so-called modern countries continues to skyrocket, along with the profits from a thriving pharmaceutical industry. And that's on record. Now, just for interest, around late October 2025, the mainstream news media channels here in New Zealand included a story about studies done on the 25 most popular liquid sunscreen creams. It was found that 12 of them, which included some very popular brands, didn't work at all, and the rest were underperforming. Now, which ones were the phonies? Well, they never said, and no one bothered to ask. It's a shame. So how much vitamin D3 is too much? Well, vitamin D3 is measured in IUs, or international units. I'm not sure why they come up with that thing. Now, the medical industry promotes the need for a healthy blood level of 25 to 40 nanograms per mil, which is a measurement of vitamin D3 in our blood. And therefore, they say individuals should aim to receive around 400 IUs of sun or the equivalent in supplements per day. Now, that's about 2 minutes in the sun. It turns out that was a standard set 100 years ago to prevent a bone disease called rickets, and that figure stands today, regardless of the conflicting facts presented by the scientific institutes and their publications. For example, the science can prove that 400 IUs per day is inadequate and miles away from creating a healthy optimum level. The science also says that 1 hour in a Mediterranean sun equates to any local inhabitant receiving the equivalent of 10,000 IUs, miles above the medical industry's recommendation of 400 IUs, with zero toxicity. Now, remembering that our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived outside in the sun for 12 hours per day, equating to 120 IUs per day with no detrimental effect. And the Australian Bondi Surf Patrol members, the Bondi boys, being outside most of each day, have a blood level between 90 and 120 nanograms per mil. And a well-researched group of people, the semi-nomadic Maasai cattle herders of southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, Africa, all have nanogram mil levels around 90. Finally, many qualified doctors outside the medical and pharmaceutical industry, of course, regularly have their patients consuming 50 to 100,000 IUs per day, plus, with no detrimental effect and with huge positive results. And it appears on record there has never been a dangerous toxicity level of vitamin D3 up to 1 million IUs per day. Now, just for interest, the most popular commercial source of vitamin D3 is called lanolin, which is the grease extracted from sheep wool. Hardly a toxic substance. Now, is vitamin D3 really a vitamin? And the answer to that is no. You see, it was only around 100 years ago when the scientists were labelling the vitamins that they discovered A, B, C and D, or D3, and that they mistakenly called D3 a vitamin. But it's not. It is a very powerful hormone, and a hormone is critical in sending the correct signals for a multitude of different reasons around our body. Without it, or if a human is lacking or deficient in any way, the signaling, along with the chemical reactions that determine the mechanism and the function of our human body, begins to fail. Again, we end up with some chronic huge health issues at every level, including mental health. Yeah. And it also turns out that the World Health Organization claimed that 80% of the population in the Western world are deficient, and that this is an epidemic. That's what they said. So, even though it's not promoted as an essential for good health by either the medical industry or the pharmaceutical industry, for many decades the science world considers the influence of the sun's rays to be vital for our health. And there are some serious and highly respected scientists who have exhaustive and well-published research on the subject. Now, what does our body need vitamin D3 for, or the effect of the sun's rays for? Okay. Now, it is the most powerful natural anti-inflammatory hormone on the planet. That's right, there's nothing that can beat it. Nature has assigned this to combat against the destructive influences of infections, disease, mental and emotional imbalance, and any other natural injury or illness resulting from just being alive and existing on this planet in the middle of space. Now, the many studies are conclusive, and here we go. It combats the likes of osteoporosis, weakness in the bones, cancers, high blood pressure, high LDL cholesterol, diabetes, heart and arterial disease, multiple sclerosis, poor sleep, leaky gut, low mood, fatigue, and etc. Like petrol in your car, it powers the immune system, regulates its cytokine killer response. Without the vitamin D3, that regulation doesn't happen and it can run out of control, and supports it during any immune reaction, which is every second of every day of our life. Therefore, is critical in wound healing, beating infections of any kind, including the common cold and flu. The lack of it in the winter is the cause of winter blues or depression, postnatal depression, deficiency in a lactating mother and hence a newborn, fatigue, muscle and bone pain, poor sleep, irregular heartbeat, poor wound healing and other associated heart issues, inefficient hormone production and function, both male and female infertility. It's a big one and so simple. It regulates calcium and magnesium, and virtually everyone with mental health issues is depleted in vitamin D3. Get your levels tested, for goodness sake. It activates the stem cell repair and replacement of our gut lining cells every night while we sleep. Now, a small problem. The older we get, the less our body can produce the required levels of vitamin D3 and cholesterol, which is needed simply for us to function and stay alive, including brain health and the prevention of cancerous invasions. That is why many elderly in rest homes are deficient and therefore need testing and supplements, for goodness sake. And not to forget the huge cancer protective effect of vitamin D3, get this, on our large colon and prostate gland. It was discovered that those with colon and or prostate cancers had very low levels of D3. It was also found that the higher the vitamin D3 levels in any society, the lower the all-cause mortality or death rate statistics. And it goes on and on. Now, consider this. A study found that if the health system throughout the Western world was to treat everybody with vitamin D3 supplements instead of the prescribed medications for the obvious affliction, it would cost the pharmaceutical industry around $2 trillion a year in lost income. I have no idea of how much $2 trillion is. It's too much for my tiny brain. But that would also mean the end of the pharmaceutical industry's dominance. And they're not going to let that happen in a hurry. Now, just for interest, the comparison was $1 trillion back in 2014. Now, call it inflation or growing market share. Who knows? And what about the connection between the sun's rays and the flu virus that goes around each year? That's a really good one. You will have noticed that the flu comes round each year. However, the reality is it is floating in the air throughout the world all the time. That's where it lives. On its travels, every time it discovers an unhealthy population for any reason, but it's usually with low sunlight and poor vitamin D content, it takes the opportunity to infect them, rapidly multiply, and to mutate slightly into another form, ready for the next infection. And it carries on its journey because there is nothing to stop it. That's the opportunistic flu virus life cycle. It's normal, it's natural, and for the flu virus, it's very healthy. Now, if you looked at the statistics for all causes of death in any country, including our own in the Southern Hemisphere, you would notice the incidence of illness and death relating to the annual flu was at its highest either side of the shortest day, being the winter months, and lowest on either side of the longest day, being the summer months. That's right, the common denominator is the amount of sunshine we receive in the creation of vitamin D3 inside our body. and the warmth from the sun's rays. Now, good amounts protect us and poor amounts allow the virus to infect us. Really simple. And it was exactly the same response by the COVID virus infection. Oh yes, it was exactly the same. Those who didn't get infected or were only lightly infected pre the chemical jab, that became a different story, had well recognized levels of vitamin D3. It turns out it's no secret, it hasn't been a secret. And it has been the same for millions of years. Now finally, why do we become deficient in vitamin D3? Well, apart from too much slip, slop and slap culture, choosing to stay out of the sun for any and every reason, brown-skinned people living in a low sunlight regions, a lifetime of night shift work, and the fact that our body converts less sunshine as we age, and we all convert it at different rates of efficiency, and living a stressful life is very expensive on the D3 as it's used in the manufacture of the stress hormones, for goodness sake. Here is a bit of science to consider. Vitamin D3 is a single-use molecule. Single-use molecule, meaning when it's used inside our body, it's gone. It's gone. But now it has to be replaced by more sun supplements or diet. If you have an infection of any kind, D3 will be prioritized by the immune system, and that includes over a lactating mother, which would be the second priority. Because if the lactating mother is dead because of the infection, the lactation is not worth anything. So once D3 is used, it is gone and must be replaced. Infections of every kind, stress at any level, and even the lactating mother are a drain on the D3 reserves, which means that vitamin D3 is continually being used up, but not necessarily being replaced. Unless we are aware, of course, and we take action and do something about it, this can quickly lead to deficiency throughout the body, which leads to further illness of all kinds, which leads to the body being further drained, which leads to more illness at every level, including mental well-being. The winter blues and depression is a classic example of this, and a good time of the year to take plenty of D3 supplements. Okay, I'm sure you get the point just as I did. Now my suggestion is, just a suggestion, some of us are very inefficient at converting sunshine to D3 in our body. Therefore it is important to get your vitamin D3 blood levels tested. Now you might just find that your local doctor is not going to or is unable to help you with this, but at least ask them where you can get them tested yourself. And then you will know exactly where you stand. While taking around 5 to 10,000 IUs per day in order to maintain optimum levels by either sunshine or supplements is very common and with zero side effects, and especially going into and through the winter months. Now that you know why we need it, especially during the winter months. Now, has your doctor informed you of all this science? If not, then why not? I think that's a good question, and you should ask them. Now, if you want to learn any more on this subject, then YouTube Professors Angus Dalgleish, Professor Paul Goddard, Professor David Grimes, and Dr. John Campbell, and the subject vitamin D3. All world leaders in their fields, and don't forget TEDx.com, subject vitamin D3, and you start building a very good picture. Nice job, everyone, and I hope that answers a few questions for you. Okay, we'll catch you later. Bye-bye.